Welcome to Bluegrass Brooklyn, our podcast all about the music we love, straight from the Bluegrass borough of Brooklyn, New York.
Hello, and welcome to this Monday edition of the Bluegrass Brooklyn podcast. I'm your host, Liz Wolfe, and in these editions, we explore topics that are related to and supporting our favorite music, bluegrass. Enjoy the show.
I want to welcome our guest today, who is Kira Grunenberg. Kira is a writer. She's a freelance music journalist, and she's a fan of all kinds of music. And I met Kira after the show we were both at to see The Porch on Windy Hill, and there was a talk back after it. And why I thought it would be great to have Kira on as a guest is because she's very knowledgeable in the world of covering music and the world of music in general, and has an interesting backstory herself. So welcome, Kira. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I love that we just happen to meet in the wild, so to speak. It's not very often, what with everything being so interconnected and everyone sending direct messages and shoot me a text, that you run into a like-minded individual that's in the business, not just in real life, but like at a mutually appreciated show. So I thought that was just a really nice serendipitous event.
And isn't that one of the beautiful things about living in New York, which is I went to the show. I didn't even know there was a talk back afterwards. And then I got the additional value and benefit of staying. That's what's so great. Other people have to drive a long way to do something like that. And all I have to do is go downtown.
It's definitely a plus. I'm actually not in the city, so I'm one of those people that has to travel a little bit, but it's just, I'm fortunate that it's just a quick train ride away, and I've been doing it for years. And so for me, it was actually a combination of in-person and also a little bit of digital, because I came across Porch on Windy Hill kind of spontaneously, and the way they promoted the show was just so, for me anyway, grabbed my attention that I was like, all right, I got to get tickets. I got to go. I got to write about this. And then I ended up covering it, and it just connected really well with the cast and the team behind the story. And that was how you ended up finding me on that stage after the one performance. They just said, you were just really into telling people about this story, and you feel really passionate about it.
So what about the marketing that appealed to you in that particular case?
Well, it was just a really shocking sort of lineup of a lot of different, very specific elements that related to me on a personal level. To give you a very quick elevator pitch, the story revolves around these two people, this couple, who are on a road trip to learn about different forms of Americana and bluegrass and folk, and understand the interconnectedness of where it all comes from for one of the people's PhD for their dissertation. And the girl in the play, Mira, is a Korean American, and she is a violinist. And there's a checkered past and some big giant question marks with regard to her family origins and some strained relationships. And by happenstance, when she's on her road trip with her boyfriend, she runs across her estranged grandfather, and they end up connecting over music as a way to bridge what I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, that family awkwardness when you got a couple of relatives that you just either haven't seen in a long time, or there's some tension there. And the play just comes together with a great story, amazing performances. And for me, being a Korean American myself, growing up a violinist and being an active folk music writer, it was really hard not to say, I need to see what this is about. So yeah, I mean, what are the odds? It's
right.
Pretty specific aspects of a person.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah. So what drew you to be a journalist for music rather than the 10,000 other things that you could have been writing about?
So for me, I've always been drawn to academic settings. I was always really into probably what a lot more people would say they don't enjoy doing in school, which is I liked to write papers. I liked to read and research and ask questions and answer my own questions by writing and by breaching discussion. And when I finished my studies at NYU, my studies at the time, the way that it was structured was there was a lot of group interplay and a lot of bouncing of ideas off people and regular talking and regular interaction with what was going on in the real world in the industry. And when that ended, I felt a little bit of a void. And so one day I was just trying to think like, how can I cope with this? And it was at the time in the early aughts, without dating myself too much, when blogs were really big and people were writing things and posting them on different sites. And so I started a blog, and it was just a way for me to do what I had been doing with other people, but just putting it out into the void and seeing if people would respond. And over time, I just did it more and more, and then it shifted and I refined it a little more, and it became more of a centralized place where I went from sharing open thoughts about the industry to writing formal reviews and interviewing people and taking a little bit more of a conventional structure. And that started as a website where I cover all different types of music. And from there, I branched out into talking with other editors, writing for other outlets, and finding platforms that resonated with me a little bit more, maybe than others. I did start out by saying I love all kinds of music, but I found my niche with writing roots music reviews and talking to country artists and bluegrass artists, and everything just blossomed from there. So.
Yeah, usually the words Korean American and bluegrass don't go together, although I think bluegrass is spreading the world over. Do you actually play bluegrass with your violin/fiddle?
Well, when I was coming up in school, it wasn't my primary focus. I was pretty much more the conventional route of the traditional classical canon, your Mozart, your Beethoven, that sort of thing. But I've grown to appreciate the more informal and more interpersonal nature of jamming and casual session play with friends. And I think it definitely, in a paradoxical way, like is something that doesn't prompt itself to very strict, rigid study the way like classical conservative. So basically, even though I'm sure a lot of people out there who have maybe spent time in music school know the typical very formal, very rigid structure that comes with taking classes, taking lessons, juries, all that. Doing folk music and learning how to improvise really wasn't part of my day-to-day when I was coming up. But as I've been out in the real world and as time has gone on, I've really come to appreciate the simultaneous casualness and interpersonalness of folk music and of jam sessions and improvising with people, and the nature of its own form and kind of conventionality. It feels to me like a two-sided coin that's both not taking itself too seriously and also has its expected norms and its in-crowd and its understood traditions. So it's something that I think could be learned from a lot more, and it would be helpful to the conservatory space and the more formal academic space to look to the folk and bluegrass crowd and take more of that in and see it more for the unique space that it is. It's different, but it's not lesser just because it's a little more structured and a little more in the wild.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up an interesting point. Everything beautiful about classical training, some of which I wish I had more of. I think I only came to more theory-based ideas much later in my musical career and journeys. So have the sense that rigidness turns people away from music because they think I have to be at a certain level, I have to be at a certain quality in order to, quote, be a musician. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's definitely something I have both heard and felt myself as somebody who just inherently, I guess, to my personality, I can tend to be a little bit of a perfectionist. I'd like to think I've let go of some of it as time has gone on.
Right.
I think coming into school with that sort of mindset as part of a person's personality, on top of the very high standards that a lot of schools expect from you as a music student, where you're expected to perform, and those performances get you a grade, and those grades are attached to a number, and it's all very black and white. And then since playing folk music and playing at hootenannies or in pickin' circles can lead to a much more fluid and less predictable dynamic, it can be a little difficult to shift from that space in your head of, okay, I have to practice this piece, I have to practice this section, I have to get it exactly right, I have to be able to replicate it the same way, 1, 10, 100 times. Whereas if you're improvising with a group of 5 people and you're doing that one week and then the next week it's a different 5 people, it's not going to be exactly the same. It's not going to have the exact same speed, flavor, color. You might not play the same pieces, and it's hard to make that shift sometimes. But I think there's something to be said for letting a person's head let go a little bit to say what makes something quote unquote good or right or perfect doesn't necessarily have to be according to that standard of meeting a certain metric or making a certain number in order for it to be legitimate. I think sometimes when we get caught up in that, we can forget about the spirit of music and why a lot of times people end up going to music school in the first place, which is because we love it and because it moves something in us and because we want to play it as often as possible.
It's interesting. The one thing that has been said, let's say, about classical, let's use violin as an example, because I think that's, other than guitar and maybe the mandolin, you're not going to get a lot of classical banjo players. So let's just use the violin as an example. So one of the things I've heard is that sometimes fiddle players have difficulty in improvising because they've only been taught to read what's on the page. And even as you're talking about this, I'm thinking also, in addition to that, there's an expectation that you would repeat that over and over again. And then that's the goal, is to have a finished piece that you then stand up and play. And that does add another element to it. I'm no longer valuing the differences that may come out in the different times that I'm playing with others.
Absolutely. And it's not even just bluegrass. This is something that I have mentally taken in more and really tried to hold on to as a writer. Like when I evaluate music and when I'm listening to a record where there may be a lot of improvised sections, not just for bluegrass, but I also critique a lot of jazz music. And so it's a very similar type thing where there is a lot of technique and a lot of history and a lot of structure and theory involved in jazz music and writing jazz music. And even those very complicated arrangements where there are flats and sharps and accidentals and things that make the music have the tonal color it does. But then when you end up sitting down with 3 or 4 or 5 people and again doing a similar type of improvisational just jamming, people aren't going, oh, you had that half step wrong, you really ought to put this note or this scale. People are saying to go with the vibe, to go with what feels right with the groove or with the rhythm or with the flow of what's happening in the people around you. And so a shared, I think, mindset, which is probably how, incidentally, I ended up gravitating towards a lot of not just writing about folk records, but also about jazz. But people look at me and go, those two things don't really share space. I'm like, they don't seem like they do, but they do in a lot of ways. So it definitely can be difficult for people to let go of that. And I'm not out playing gigs on the regular, but if I were, I would definitely say that that type of rigidity versus going with the flow is definitely something that I struggle with, or I have struggled with before. And whenever I do get a chance to just jam and improvise with people, I try to take it to heart more about what I'm thinking when I'm reviewing a record and apply that same type of mindset when I try to play with people. To say, this isn't about getting a grade. It's not about passing a test. It's about being present with what you're playing and with the people you're with.
There's certainly value in all forms of music. I love the connection between that improvisation of jazz and bluegrass, and I'm sure other genres as well. So What even during your career have you seen shifts in the music world and the music scene, and I guess you would say in the music industry?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there have just even in the last 5 to 10 years, the industry has shifted so much in terms of how music fans take in their music, how music is discussed, or how fans give feedback. And then the traditional space of like, where does a person find a review, or how is it reviewed, or what's deemed good versus not good. And, 10 or 12 so years ago, you'd see your typical reviews on websites like Billboard and Pitchfork and Rolling Stone. And you'd go there and you'd read these things, and it would have a star rating or a number, and it would tell you, go out and buy this or don't go out and buy this. And that was treated as gospel. And then, like I said, there was a period where independent blogs and independent voices started to come up, and people that were either super fans or maybe just didn't have those connections to have those staff jobs said, well, I have something to say, and I think I can articulate it well, and people will want to talk to me about it. And so those voices found ways to get their voices out there, even without some kind of branded backing. And that's how you ended up with the likes of Anthony Fantano doing his video reviews, and he's now become a large icon across multiple genres. And he would just say his opinion, and it was a mix of his opinion and some sort of technical evaluations of the record. And since then, it's changed even more. You have people doing elongated threads on sites like X, formerly known as Twitter, on Blue Sky, on Threads. And it's just continues to shift in terms of what people are consuming in terms of volume. Like your typical review, it used to be 600 words, solid block of text, and it would tell you what you wanted to know. And now we've gotten down to people being able to give micro reviews that take all 20 seconds to read, but give you the hard hitting, is it good or is it not good? And that's what people, and the industry continues to change with what people seem to want to say and how they want to say it. So,
And also of interest is going back to the Rolling Stone, Billboard. Again, I don't know that much about those organizations to say they're good, bad, or indifferent. However, you can see the trend that just in the same way the record industry used to basically bring up one person or one band, and then that was what they presented, and that's what you listened to because you didn't have access to anything else, because you only had access to what you heard on the radio. And only in retrospect do we hear, how that was actually controlled in so many ways. And in some ways, it's really amazing that more writers can have their voices be heard, more critics can have their voices be heard. On the other hand, it's similar to that there's now this flood of where could you go? You could go to X, you could go to probably Reddit or 1,000 blogs and different things. So in the same way, there's almost too much choice, from this perspective. What do you think?
oh, yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm never going to be able to hear all the music that I want to hear. I am a self-proclaimed champion of physical media. I still buy CDs when I go to shows. If artists are still selling them, I will be like, give me that and let me add it to my collection. And you start to run out of room on the shelf. But it definitely can be overwhelming. I mean, even just one landscape where I tend to go to a lot for music, Bandcamp, it's always been about independent artists. And so you can upload your music and you don't have to be on a major label. You don't have to have the best quality technology or the most fancy type of recording. You don't have to have a certain number of listeners. And what I always liked about it is you can see music from quite literally all over the world. Like you go into the search bar and you type, I want to hear punk music from Sri Lanka, and something will come up.
Wow.
Well, you want to hear, is there folk music in the rural parts of Tokyo? And there'll be something. And so it reminds you that possibilities are out there. But it also is, when people can upload things every day, it's like, I will never run out of things to buy and never run out of things to listen to. So it can be inundating. If you're a music lover, it's like permanent FOMO. But in terms of just the endless endless tunnel of ways people can talk about the said music. It's the same thing. And I used to feel a little bit of not, I guess panic isn't the word, it's too extreme, but like a little bit of stress of, oh, I want to read everything. I need to hear everything that everyone has to say about XYZ records that came out this week. And it's just not possible. I mean, even if I did nothing else, but just go from one piece to the next piece to the next piece, you can't do it all. So you just try, for me anyway, I try to read and try to encounter as many different types of perspectives on either one record or whatever the genre of the moment is, and just try to take in a variety of viewpoints that sometimes I think help to either further inform my own opinion or maybe even just add to it in a way that I didn't expect, where I might start out by saying, I didn't really like that record. I don't know if it's for me. And then I might read something somebody says that illuminates something about a record that I didn't think of. And I'll say, okay, let me go back and listen to that with that aspect in mind from this other person. And then once I do that, it suddenly makes it click more and it opens up the music in a way that was not coming to me the first time. And I might end up changing my opinion. So that's what I like to think that music writing can be good for, regardless of what rating a person gives or whether you're a professional journalist or you just have a blog or you just tweet about what you like. I think ultimately all music discourse, professional or not, is about sharing music with other people, and the more people that hear whatever the music it is you're talking about, and the more we can all talk about it, the more music continues to fill our world. And I think that's the ultimate point.
So do you have any favorite bluegrass artists that you like to listen to?
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, I feel like if I don't just say everyone, it's going to feel like I'm leaving people out. But I have always been, at the risk of sounding cliche, because there are millions of us, but I'm a huge Chris Thile fan. I'm a huge Chris Thile fan because I'm a huge Nickel Creek fan. I had a friend who made me an old-fashioned mix CD when I was in college and said, you're a violinist, you like good fiddle, you should listen to this group. And then I retroactively went to the music store and bought their entire back discography and did a crash course. And actually, that's how I ended up listening to a lot of artists. Is sometimes it'll be an individual or a group that has a pretty established career at that point, and I will just be like, nope, I got to go back and basically do binge watching, but for music. But to get more on track with your question directly, I'm a big fan of everything from the established folks like Sierra Hull, Aoife O'Donovan, Sarah DeRose, their whole thing with Sarah Watkins doing what they're doing, and I'm with her. I am a big fan of Punch Brothers and all the individual exploits of all the members therein. I'm always looking for new voices. And it's funny, actually, you mentioned about, well, would there be a lot of classical banjo players? I spoke recently with an up-and-coming banjoist who is in a quartet called Ezra. And the person, his name is Max Allard. And I wrote an article for Bluegrass Situation recently about his banjo concerto that he wrote when he was studying at Oberlin as part of his coursework. And he talks a lot about those intersecting points between bluegrass technique and the conventional structure of writing a typical classical composition. Even just recently, I don't know if you heard, Sierra Hull just released a recording called The Movements, and she wrote as part of a collaboration for the Fresh Grass Foundation. She just wrote a concerto also. So it seems like maybe there's a moment happening there.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. So many interesting aspects of bluegrass and folk music and other things to keep exploring. What's the best way if people want to reach you or connect with you in some way?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful chatting with you. So I am on Blue Sky, and I'm also on Instagram, and you can find me on both under the username Shadow Melody, the number 1. And my website has been on a little bit of hiatus, but a lot of my writing is on my website, which is throwthediceandplaynice.com. There's a whole long story behind the name of the website, which I'm glad to share with anybody if they want to message me. But there is a whole backlog of reviews, interviews, and other such pieces from there. And it is still active. It's just, like I said, on a bit of a hiatus. But I'm very much still active in online discourse. And so if anybody ever wants to chat about a record or about some trend in bluegrass, put a post out there on one of those social platforms. And I'm always up for a good conversation like we just had. So.
That's great. Well, we will put all those links into the program notes so anybody can jump on and read and get on and see everything. So once again, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. Again, my name is Liz Wolfe. Please subscribe to our podcast and follow us on our social media so you never miss an episode. You can find us online at bluegrassbrooklyn.com. Brooklyn is spelled BKLYN. See you around the jam circle.